Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update for the 23rd of December 2023. This is Christmas Eve, so I'm sure we'll start celebrating that as a thing. Any excuse for a drink or something, mince pies. Right, we'll get to where we normally start. Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. You can find them in the description to my video below. And for those pro-Kremlin voices on the thread that talk about, you know, the old laughy face emoji, because that's what you do, you know, when you talk about war deaths. You just laugh it off. You know, go and check those caveats. They apply every day. 1,040 personnel loss, even if you're going to take, I mean, Ben Hodges talks about 20%, you can take 20% off and these will still be accurate. Other analysts, Western analysts have said, I remember Dom Nichols from Ukrainian Latest podcast, the former military man himself writing for the Daily Telegraph, said on speaking to Western intelligence officials, they say take 20% off and you'd be round about there. So you do whatever you see fit, but I use these as trend line indicators. And 1,040 is a heavy day of losses for the Russian. Anything over 1,000 is really heavy for the Russian. That's your top end of the scale. I know we've seen it up to 1,300 or so recently, but yeah, anything over 1,000 is bad. 17 tanks is bad. 28 APVs is bad. And 36 artillery systems is really pretty bad. So I guess that's a bad day for the Russians at the office. But, as I always have to say, at what cost to the Ukrainians as well? So we know, and it's really interesting listening to Andrew Perpetua talk about Krinky last night on his live stream, because it's exactly what I've been saying recently, which is that the Ukrainians must be there because it is a ratio that is still advantageous for them. I use it in the same way, or I see it in the same way that I think the Ukrainians treated Bakhmut, which is fixing Russian troops, attriting Russian troops, yes, losing a lot yourself, but at a ratio that is beneficial to Ukraine. And actually, when you look at what's happening around Krinky, over 100 pieces of kit lost. Some people say as much as 150. Some saw an analysis this morning saying benchmark minimum of something like, you know, visually confirmed something like 70 pieces of kit, something around there. But I think general understanding is somewhere between 100 and 150 pieces of kit. This is a really expensive place for Russia, but they're also hammering the Ukrainians. And Andrew was talking about seeing some medic videos, like an hour-long video montage of like Ukrainian injured people getting medevaced. It is tough for the Ukrainians. But the calculation must be, yes, it's tough for us and it's horrible to sacrifice these people for this, but the gains are still in favor of the Ukrainians. Anyway, 17 tanks, 28 APVs is tough going for the Russians and probably indicates that they are on the attack in a number of places. So we've seen assaults in Sinkivka up in the north. We've seen assaults in Novomykhailivka, Stepova, all over the shop really, Terny, north of Terny as well. All around Terny, where indeed the Ukrainians have lost 3 Stridsvagn 122, I think they're called, the Swedish variant of the Leopard 2A5. So 3 of them, 2 abandoned, 1 destroyed, I believe, around Terny. So they are taking their own losses, but just not to the same degree as the Russians. 36 artillery systems is a huge day of artillery, artillery degradation, I guess, for the Russians. 51 vehicles and fuel tanks is phenomenal. That is a huge loss and will affect their ability to do logistics and just like transport troops around, I guess. 6 pieces of special equipment that can be ISIs, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, excavators, whatever. They're losing quite a bit of kit on a daily basis, according to these stats. Now, I did a breaking news extra on this yesterday. The news that as according to the Ukrainian Air Force commander, 3 Russian Su-34 fighter bombers were shot down in this area, apparently. So this is Crimea, north of Crimea. You've got Army Ants here, and you've got Kherson there, somewhere between those two. And these are the sorts of planes, or these are the planes that drop all of those bombs on the Dnipro River. Each of these planes has now been equipped to carry 4, well, you used to be able to carry 2 FABs with their glide kits on. Now they can carry 4, and they're looking to carry 6 eventually. So when you have 3 of these, that's 12 bombs being dropped on, say, for example, just Krinky alone. And then they'll go back, there'll be another wave, and these are just taking place consistently throughout the day. So 3 getting taken down will affect their ability to do that, not only in the loss of the planes, but the loss of the experienced crew as well. Now, as soon as that happened, the Russians started coming out with their accounts of the event. So, for example, the Grey Zone channel suggesting that it might have been friendly fire because that has happened before. So that's one, to admit that they do have an issue with friendly fire of their own aircraft, and to give that account for what had happened. We've also heard that it could be a Ukrainian MiG-29 that had got through and into that deep into Russian territory and was causing havoc or whatever. There's also a lot of theorizing concerning F-16s, and a lot of actually Western sources are touting this as a possibility. I think it's highly unlikely. However, this is what Rebar said. I said yesterday that this, I think, plays into the Russian narrative better than getting hammered by Patriot air defense systems, which is, I think, the only way that Russians can look at that is, oh, dang, we're in trouble. Whereas this allows them to kind of blame the Western coalition for providing F-16s, to then give, I guess, grist to the mill in terms of, future missile attacks on airfields, so on and so forth. So I think they would prefer it to be F-16s, and then they can just shout about F-16s rather than, if it's the Patriot, they have to admit that the Patriot air defense system is the best air defense system in the world, pretty much, and that it causes them all sorts of trouble. They were really quiet when that happened up in Bryansk area. I think it was Bryansk or Belgorod, when that Patriot system took down 5 in one day. I think it's just slightly more embarrassing. So anyway, this is Rebar. According to Russian FSB-backed Rebar, a full F-16 fleet is already on Ukrainian territory, up to 12 combat and 3 training aircraft. Another fleet is planned to be transferred by mid-spring. Again, according to Rebar, high-precision parts of these aircraft are delivered through Lviv throughout December. They were that's why they hit Starokonstantiniev, Dnipropetrovsk and Kryvyi Rih. In addition, training flights of Ukrainian F-16s are carried out over Romania and Western Ukraine. The airfields in Ivano-Frankivsk and Uzhgorod are used for those purposes. So that's what Rebar claims. So it's not claiming that the F-16s were used in Kherson. However, there are claims on the back of that they were used in Kherson. It is worth mentioning that there are other sources claiming that actually F-16s will be in place, or at least some of them will be in place by the end of this year, as in by the end of December, as in about a week's time. So it's not to dismiss this as not being correct. I just don't think I don't think the thesis that F-16s took down those planes is that plausible, personally. Okay, so let's go through a couple of analyses. This is Tendar, German source, saying the information regarding 3 destroyed Su-34s is still fluid. We still need some more solid facts, but the evidence already at hand and the fuming in pro-Russian social media networks, we can be sure that it is basically genuine. Everything points to an event similar to the so-called Bryansk massacre in May 2023, where in a matter of a few minutes, 2 fighter planes and 3 choppers of the Russian Air Force were blown out of the sky in Bryansk, Russia. The Ukrainian Air Force later confirmed that it was responsible and that a MIM-104 Patriot air defense system was used, finally proving all speculation. So, in other words, there's form for this kind of activity, and, previous that it was, at least in the previous case, a Patriot used. The events today in the south of Ukraine are similar, but in some aspects even more impressive. It required extensive coordination and planning. The 3 Russian Su-34 are likely part of an air group attacking the Ukrainian detachment in Krinky, Kherson. Russians have been using improved FAB-500 missiles or bombs, which they fired more than 50 kilometers from the impact points and out of range of short and medium range air defense assets of the Ukrainian army. Russians felt basically safe to deploy their standoff weapons. Yes and no. There have been Russian people like Fighter Bomber, Russian Telegram channel, or which is supposedly an actual pilot that is flying, or at least his PR person or whatever. But there is evidence that Russians do consistently claim that it is dangerous. These are not they're not flying with impunity. They do have losses, but yeah, you get the point. This has dramatically changed. It is highly likely that Ukraine deployed the latest MIM-104 Patriot battery in the south, likely the latest Patriot battery from Germany. The PAC-2 variant has a range of at least 160 kilometers and probably more. This considerably extended the zone in which the Ukrainian air defense was able to destroy the enemy airplanes. I marked it in orange on my map, but it is a relatively conservative estimation and considers that the battery is not deployed too close to the current front line. You can easily extend that area and strike even deeper. So that is this map that he's talking about. That would be really significant if you could take out air assets in that range. But of course, as soon as they use it, they'd have to move it. Realistically. So I speculate, he says, that once the 3 Russian fighter planes were in the kill zone, the Patriot system turned on, targeted the enemy planes, and then fired its missiles. This is common practice for all missile-based air defense assets. The missiles travel with the speed of Mach 4 and reach their targets within 1 to 2 minutes, which is virtually impossible for the Russian planes to counter or to lose altitude. Yet the level of planning and coordination is extremely difficult. Even with the excellent weapon systems such as the Patriot, you cannot take this for granted. Even small errors could cause failure in the undertaking or even threaten the own survival of the air defense system. The window of success is short and dangerous, but just like in Bryansk, they succeeded. The Ukrainian air defense system once again showed us how capable they are, a tribute to their nerve-ending ingenuity. For the Russian war effort, this is extremely bad news. The Russian swarms of drones and missiles in this winter are getting effectively repelled so far. Ukraine finally allows to use its best air defense system, even for offensive operations. This is something I've been asking for a long time. Krinky is only one example, but a good one. Despite the Ukrainian forces only having around 300 to 500 men in Krinky, and the Russians on the other side around 7 brigades, which should actually be enough to repel the small Ukrainian detachment in Krinky alone. It was mainly the Russian Air Force that encountered the small Ukrainian unit. And basically it was the Air Force that were doing most of the attrition. The Russian ground forces were pummeled by artillery and drones, and it was the Russian planes that weren't counted yet. This has obviously changed, and it will be another painful thorn in Russia's side. This also comes only after weeks when the Russian Su-24M was shot down over the Black Sea near Snake Island. The message is clear. The south is now officially a hot area for the Russian Air Force. Even though we shouldn't get too carried away around these events, it nevertheless shows us that even with a limited extension of supplies, Ukrainian forces can inflict decisive losses on the Russian war machinery. And this is also no new development. Ukrainians always overperformed, with that little they got. And with the right weaponry, and especially with the right amount, they can finish a job. The Russian strategy is purely based on the West stopping delivering supplies. They have no plan B, no alternative. And when we start raising the stakes and go seriously in with our supplies and industry, then Ukraine will liberate all the Ukrainian territory and finish a war that Russia started. Okay. Broadly speaking, agree with that. And indeed, once Ukraine can take Russian air superiority, or it's not that at the moment, it's air advantage away from them, then they can start having a greater effect. The Ukrainians can start having a greater effect on the front line and be able to support their own troops with helicopter and fixed-wing aircraft provision. This is really important. This bit of news of Patriots being used near the front line is super important. It's something that needed to happen. You could argue it should have happened previously. Andrew Perpetua was talking about this on his live stream last night. He said, after the Berdyansk and Luhansk strikes with ATACMS, the retaliation from the Russians was to send up lots of waves of fighter bombers to hammer the heck out of Dnipro, right? There were simultaneously 2 groups of 4 planes. Wouldn't it have been amazing if they'd had that Patriot system in place at that time and taken out 8 aircraft? Of course, that didn't happen, but it has happened now, and that is good. St. Yuri says what was believed to be so here you've got evidence. There's some evidence that this is indeed what happened. Believed to be the contrail of 3 Patriot MIM-104 missiles that were fired at 3 Russian Air Force Su-34s that was somewhere over the occupied left bank of Kherson. The missiles, 3 kills. I just can't see a Su-34 defeating the Patriot. And this was the Russian source that talked about it yesterday. A black day for our VKS, the Russian Air Force. In the Kherson direction, we simultaneously lost 3 Su-34 aircraft. Condolences to the families and loved ones of the victims. A big hello to those who were happy that our birds were bombing the enemy bridgehead in Ukrainian positions on the right bank. We warned from the very beginning that this was a very dangerous operation. So it goes back to what I was saying, and they weren't flying with impunity. It was dangerous, at least they thought. Recall that the enemy has already used the latest air defense system in this area. On November the 25th, we wrote that the Su-34 pilot, during a flight to Krinky, fell into the range of a powerful radar of an unknown SAM. These signals were ignored. Unfortunately, it was only a matter of time before a tragedy akin to today's one occurs. After the incident near the island of Zhmeny, so Snake Island, many military helicopters refused, but under pressure from the command, they were able to turn around. So anyway, it's also worth noting that Fighter Bomber, that's the Telegram channel I was talking about earlier, posted some funeral music on his channel. So I think we can safely say it definitely happened. It's most probably Patriot air defense system that did that. Each of those planes cost around 36 million, says Radu Hosu. Therefore, Russia lost, in this case, over $130 million worth of equipment, and most importantly, and unrecoverable, the pilots, two in number of this plane, with exceptional characters. I never underestimate the adversary nor his technology. I think one pilot survived. The Su-34 is a relatively new fourth-generation aircraft, entered service in 2014, of which an estimated 155 were built, which 25 have been lost in the war in Ukraine, or 16% of the total fleet. Speculation here, so several sources, both Ukrainian and Russian, as seen on the map by a Russian source, indicate that some of the F-16 promised to Ukraine have already arrived to operate at least training flights in the Ukrainian space, taking off from Romania. This is also why the Kremlin has issued a new wave of threats to states that will help with F-16, saying that they will bomb NATO air bases from which they will take off. Russia is basically stepping up its anti-NATO rhetoric, banking on people's fear of the 2024 elections that will take place in many NATO member countries, including Romania, Ukraine's biggest border, and the US. As a Romanian directly involved in the war in Ukraine, I can only welcome these speculations, hope that they are true, and that indeed we have political leaders that are, at least on the external level, have blood in the plumbing, as President Zelensky especially thanked us in his last press conference this year, saying, "Thank God for Romania." And this is ahead of the news that 18 Dutch F-16s, and I'll report that in my next video, are due to arrive in Ukraine. Lots of talk about F-16s. I think it was obviously, though, Patriot that did that. And just to keep on the subject of planes, here we have Ukrainian Air Force JDAM strikes on Russian warehouses in Kherson. It's significant because we haven't seen too much JDAM activity. These are the equivalent of the Russian FAB 500s. These are the guided glide bombs. They've had problems with these, possibly in terms of supply of them, but certainly at least some issues with the jamming of these. So Russians have been able to jam these. So it's really good that we are starting to see them be used again. I've said this a number of times, but we just don't see particularly widespread use of these. And I don't know whether that's an issue with the aircraft, a lack of aircraft. I don't know, or it's the munitions themselves. Anyway, time for a cup of tea. Thank you. Right, moving on to distance strikes. Tim White says that Ukraine said it knocked down 9 of 9 drones launched by Russia. That is 100% interception rate. We are seeing a much better interception rate in the last few months. So when the interception rate is stated as something like 75% on average or something, I'm not sure what the latest stats are. Bear in mind that will take into account the entire course of the war. So at the beginning of the war, when they were not very good at intercepting, right up to now when they are very good at intercepting. So at the moment, we've had like sort of 95% interception rates very, recently. 100% last night. There were 34 out of 35, 24 out of 28. So I think it will be useful to see averages that are compiled over the last 2-3 months as opposed to the whole war, to give us a better understanding of what's going on with the air defense network in Ukraine. Now, Ukraine themselves are using a number of different drones. So please note the diversity of Ukrainian assault drone designs to stress Russian air defenses, says Trent Telenko, based on a Straya intel here, saying the enemy released images of Ukrainian UJ-25 Skyline with a jet engine that crashed in Bryansk. It is believed to be able to carry a payload of 10 kilograms with a speed of 600 kilometers per hour. So this is a quick drone and a range of at least 400 kilometers. The precise characteristics remain classified. They just have quite a variety of drones to use at the moment, the Ukrainians. In occupied Berdyansk, ongoing reports of multiple explosions. So that's on the coast of the Azov Sea, just to the northeast of Crimea. Russia's invaders say they shot down 6 drones. However, on chat sites, residents write about noises all over the city and fire trucks racing to different locations, particularly near the railway station. There is activity around, has been activity around Berdyansk. Also, Armyansk, which is, as I pointed out to you earlier, the northwest of Crimea. It's in between sort of Crimea and the mainland. That has been targeted by the Ukrainians. Explosions reported there. And indeed, Chornomorska, again in the northwest of Crimea, on the coast. Getting reliable information about what's happening there is difficult, but last month there were strikes on that same place, and it's basically where they have S-300s, S-400s that have been targeted. So it could be further air defense systems being aimed at there. Kerch and Zhankoy in Crimea, their explosions and air defense is active there, and indeed Kerch Bridge has been closed and smoke screens have been put up. So it looks like Crimea is being very much targeted today and last night, and indeed Sevastopol is also reported to be on air alert as well. Whether we'll find out all the information about those strikes and what's going on in particularly Crimea, I don't know, but a lot of air activity over occupied territories. Okay, which is good news. You know, Ukraine need to be doing that as much as possible. All the time. You don't want to lose your troops on the front line. You don't want to be fighting the Ukrainian. You don't want to be fighting the Russians man to man. You want to be fighting them missile to man, or missile to base, or missile to depot, or missile to air defense. And then you don't lose as many troops. Russia has created so this is on to other bits and pieces. They don't really fit anywhere else. Russia has created a fake airline which is engaged in the transportation of illegal immigrants to Europe, apparently, via Belarus. This is reported in the publication Bild, so this is a German tabloid newspaper. Nonetheless, the investigation revealed that the airline, called Southwind Airlines, is based in Antalya and was created after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. But 3 airplanes and most of the company's employers are from Moscow-based Nordwind Airlines. Nordwind Airlines is owned by Pegasus Touristik, and its owners are Russians with Turkish roots. In Belarus, by the way, direct flights from Istanbul to Minsk have recently been opened. So the idea is that they're collecting, these aren't at all like chartered tourist airplanes. They are collecting immigrants from Turkey. People want to get out of Turkey, taken to Belarus, and motivating them to try and cross the border into the countries of Europe, and thus cause social issues of social cohesion. Something we heard about a lot previously, particularly on the Belarus border. They've been doing that for, I guess, since 2015 time, but also we've seen it in Finland more recently. Okay. In recent weeks, and this is from the UK intelligence update, both Ukrainian and Russian troops have highly likely suffered from exceptional levels of rat and mice infestation in some sectors of the front line. So we've seen plenty of footage of this, and I'm sure it's the case for the Ukrainians as well. This year's mild autumn, along with ample food from fields left fallow due to the fighting, have likely contributed to the increase in the rodent population. As the weather has become colder, the animals are likely seeking shelter in vehicles and defensive positions. Rodents will add further pressure to frontline combatants' morale. In addition, they pose a risk to military equipment by gnawing through cables. This is something I reported recently, that someone questioned me that you know, mice don't like eating through electric cables. They do. I've got a hamster, and it successfully ate through my partner's parents' cables when we went on holiday, and they looked after the hamster and they let it out running around, and all the telephone cables and electrical cables were bitten through. So they do that. That's a hamster, but mice are going to be pretty much the same. Keep their teeth sharpened and whatnot. or ground down, as recorded in the same area during the Second World War. Unverified reports also suggest Russian units starting to suffer from increased sickness cases, which the troops attribute to the pest problem. And there was talk about this, quite a bit of talk about this, that the Russian command ignored this because they thought it was Russian troops trying to get off duty and trying to pretend they're ill when they weren't ill. But it was actually genuine illness, a rat sort of sickness that you can get from, I guess, rat feces and mice feces and whatnot. So, yeah, that there is an illness that appears to be affecting the Russian troops. I can't speak to whether it's affecting Ukrainians in the same way. Russia has seized the initiative on the battlefield, according to the New York Times. Kyiv needs more military personnel, and that's why they're looking to mobilize more. But this is an interesting bit for me from Nextum News. Estonia is ready to hand over refugees for mobilization. So there's this idea that Umarov wants, expatriated Ukrainian fighting age men to come and mobilize, and they are putting ramifications in place for if they refuse to do so. But it's very difficult to do anything about that when these people are living abroad and have set up shop elsewhere, and so they need the help of those nations that are kind of housing those Ukrainian refugees. Estonia appears to be ready to hand them over and to really help, because obviously Estonia are thinking we need to make sure that it's Ukrainians doing this fighting and not Estonians. Russia seized the initiative on most of the battlefield, as evidenced by the offensive of its forces near Avdiivka, as well as Kupiansk, Bakhmut and Mariinka, according to the NYT. Quote, the situation on the front line is currently difficult and gradually deteriorating. Without American ammunition, we are beginning to lose territory hard won this summer, according to Yegor Chernev, deputy chairman of the Verkhovna Rada's National Security Committee. Telling the publication. The successes of Russian troops in the area have prompted Kyiv to consider mobilizing 500,000 troops next year. Earlier, the Ukrainian media reported about amendments to the law on mobilization aimed at replenishing the number of the Ukrainian army. The amendments to the law suggest, among other things, that Ukrainian citizens living abroad will be summoned to the armed forces. Estonia, if necessary, is ready to hand over the refugees subject to mobilization in Ukraine. The country's interior minister said on Friday evening. He said Kyiv and Tallinn would need to conclude a separate bilateral agreement for this purpose. Now, in accordance with international law, the Ukrainian side cannot conscript its citizens living in Estonia. Quote, if Ukraine needs it, then Estonia can manage to find and repatriate this person to Ukraine, said Minister of the Interior. We know, in essence, where these individuals are located and what they are doing. That is interesting. So you might then see those people in Estonia, those Ukrainian refugees fleeing elsewhere in a game of sort of cat and mouse. Right. This goes back to Russian pro-Kremlin voices on threads on, Twitter, YouTube, on my threads, wherever, shouting about how, oh my goodness, Ukraine is not a free country. There's no liberty there. Having a go everywhere else, but looking internally at themselves, at Russia, looking in the mirror. Russia is not a free country, and this is another example of how Russia is not a free country. Russian Central Election Commission has refused to allow Yekaterina Duntsova to collect signatures for the presidential election. The Central Election Commission has not allowed journalist Duntsova to collect signatures in support of her self-nomination for the post of president of the Russian Federation. The reason for the refusal was alleged mistakes in the documents she provided. Quote, a total of 100 mistakes were made. In addition, the notary made mistakes when certifying the documents, and the protocol was made after the meeting itself. Earlier, journalist and former Rivne City Council member Duntsova submitted documents to the Central Election Commission to register an initiative to run for president of Russia. That's a really ballsy thing to do, because quite frankly, you're putting kind of a death sentence on your head there. Really, really courageous, I think. A video from a meeting of the Central Electoral Commission shows members voting unanimously to reject Duntsova's candidacy, according to Reuters. The head of the commission was then shown offering words of consolation to Duntsova. You are a young woman. You have put everything ahead of you. Any minus can always be turned into a plus. Any experience is still an experience. Wow, patronizing much there. Screenshots posted by Duntsova's campaign channel showed documents that it said the commission had highlighted as lacking proper signatures. When Duntsova said last month she wanted to stand, commentators had variously described as crazy, brave, or part of a Kremlin scripted plan to create the appearance of competition. Quote, any sane person taking this step would be afraid, but fear must not win, she told Reuters. So then she's been barred from running, and it talks about more the details here. Yes. Russia is not free. Russia is not democratic. Russia is a dictatorship. Putin is a dictator. I don't know that you need any more evidence than this war, everything we've seen in this war, and all the electoral shenanigans taking place right now in Russia, and really over the last 20 years, as you know, he changes the laws to allow him to rule basically forever. Everything about the political process and mechanisms and the lack of checks and balances show that Russia is a dictatorship, and Putin is an authoritarian, kind of fascistic leader. And anyone on these threads that tries to deal with these claims invariably does the whataboutery. And I'm just going to leave you with this. Just watch out for it, guys. You know it happens. Let's just remind ourselves what that is. So whataboutery or whataboutism is a variant of the two-cockquay fallacy. So the two-cockquay fallacy is, I was commissioned to write a chapter once on morality, religion and morality, and my chapter was entitled something like the two-cockquay fallacy, blah, 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 blah. Right, what is it? Whatever. What is a two-cockquay fallacy? So imagine I walked up to you and I said to you, look, you've just murdered someone and that's really morally bad. And you look back at me and said, yeah, but you murdered someone last week. So, you know, whatever. That's used at two-cockquay means you too. So you saying back to me, well, you too. However, you doing that is actually a kind of distraction. I may have murdered someone last week, whatever. That's a whole separate thing. But my accusation that you are morally bad for murdering someone just now still needs to be dealt with. You saying that I did it doesn't justify you doing it, and it has no impact on the moral evaluation of you murdering someone. Okay? So this is like, that's the you too fallacy. Well, whataboutery is the same as the you too fallacy, but instead of saying you did this, it's like, look over there, they did that, they did that, they did that, they did that. And we found this so much at the moment in politics. When politicians are critiqued on TV, radio, when they stand up and say things in different parliaments, so often, instead of dealing with what they've been accused of doing, they'll say, yeah, but look at what the other political party did back in 2017, and look at this, and look at that. It's like, yeah, whatever. We're talking about this. So when we talk about, and we criticize Russia for being authoritarian, for having a lack of democratic, any democratic ideals, mechanisms, checks and balances, etc., the Russian pro-Kremlin troll will say, yeah, but what about over, insurrection on June 6th or January the 6th, or what about Biden doing this, or what about this over there, or what about this over there, or what about Zelensky over here? It's like, all of those might be valid criticisms, but they ain't got jack to do with the fact that Russia is not a free and fair democratic nation. We are criticizing Russia here, and when you reply to that, you need to defend Russia. You don't talk about anywhere else. We're talking about this one area here, and let's keep to it. So this is just my ending the video. I know this is a news video, but just watch out for whataboutery. It is fallacious, and it is an invalid move. Don't let people get away with that. Just dismiss that. Yeah, we can have another conversation about that. No, you need to deal with this. And I ain't going anywhere until you've answered this. So you need to answer, Kremlin trolls, you need to answer how Russia is dropping down the Transparency International corruption index. And you need to answer how it is stripping away every last vestige of democratic mechanism and ideal from its nation, and you need to defend how you can justify there being a dictator, an authoritarian dictator in charge. You know, that's the conversation that I'm suggesting we have. Okay, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Take care. Speak soon.